The former public official accused of murdering journalist Jeff German wants a new judge.
Robert Tellis tried to convince one judge today to boot the judge in his upcoming murder trial.
Fox 5's Joe Vigil has covered this case since it happened. He joins us now with what Tellis and the judge had to say.
Yeah, in short, the judge told Tellis no, the current judge stays. Tellis is accused of murdering Las Vegas Review-Journal reporter Jeff German because he allegedly wasn't happy with German's reporting on his former office as public administrator. So here's Tellis trying to make his case today. He told Judge Jerry Weiss the court system is a place to get justice while being treated impartially, but says that did not happen during a hearing where he asked another judge to allow him to represent himself at trial. Back then, Clark County District Court Judge Michelle Levitt grilled Tellis over his knowledge of trials where he could not answer many basic questions. Judge Levitt told Tellis this wasn't a game. He thinks she showed hostility that would make a fair judgment impossible. Tellis said the judge lied when she told him if he went down the road of self-representation, he could never come back. And here's how he replied to that today.
After she made that representation, she spent about 40 minutes or so badgering me, harassing me, and trying to embarrass me into withdrawing my request for self-representation.
The process of questioning someone about self-representation is called a Faretta canvass, and Judge Weiss said today he didn't see anything wrong with how Judge Levitt conducted that and said the judge will stay on the case. Now, Judge Weiss called Judge Levitt one of the premier judges who's been hearing cases for a long time and knows what she's doing. Tellis denies he killed German. Back to you.